Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. So how far along are we in the soundboard app so far? Well, first of all, we have a new data model in place. And in the previous lesson, we added sample data that we used at design time to help us properly lay out the app's user interface, particularly the data template that's bound to instances of the sound data class. Now, in this lesson, we want to turn our attention to binding to real data at runtime. Now, up to this point, we've only been binding to this XAML file with sample data. And we could use this same XAML file for live data at runtime in our app. If you wanted to implement it that way, you certainly could, and you've already got a head start to taking that approach. All you got to do is just build out this XAML file with more instances of sound group and sound data, and then load that file at runtime using the sound model class's load data method. And then create instances of the given classes based on the serialized XML data here in sampledata.xaml file. All right. In fact, this might be a really good way to challenge yourself. After you finish this series of lessons, you could go back, you could recreate this app, but stop at this point and then take a different data access approach. You only learn when you struggle, and an exercise like this would force you to figure out how to load the XAML data into our data model at runtime. All right, but I digress. Our game plan for this lesson is, first of all, in the soundmodel.cs file, we're going to create a series of helper methods. And each helper method is designed to create instances of the sound data and sound group classes. So we're going to create helper methods called create animals group and create cartoons group and so on. Each one of these helper methods will create instances of the sound data class and then add them to the proper sound group's items collection, like we have defined right here. Okay? And then after we have all of our helper methods complete, then we're going to modify this load data method right here, and we're going to call each of those helper methods so that when we call load data, real data will be available at runtime. It'll set the is data loaded to true, and then we can bind at runtime, and all will be good. Okay? So you can see what happens if we were to run the app right now. We get no data inside of our app. It's because we aren't currently loading anything in our load data method. So let's go ahead and fix that right now. What we want to accomplish is to set each of the public properties of our sound model class, like the animals property, for example, and the cartoons property, to an instance of the sound group object that's already loaded with data. So let's do this. What I'm going to do is show you an example of what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm going to set the animals property equal to, and here's where I'm going to call a helper method that I'll create in just a moment. Animals group. So we'll call it like that. And let's go ahead and just generate the method stub for this. Inside of here, we'll do something like this. We're going to create a new sound group object called data equals new sound group. And then we're going to return that at the very end. In between, what we're going to do is something like this, data.items.add, and then in the add, we're going to create a new sound data object, and then we'll set, for example, the title equal to something, comma, and then the file path equal to something. And we'll just do this like, a dozen times to create one sound data object for each of the wave files in my assets, audio, animals folder. Okay? And so what we're going to do then is I'm going to just, instead of typing all this out, which can be quite a pain, I'm going to just copy and paste this. Because it's really just an exercise in typing, and it would be easier at this point to just recommend that you spend the time understanding what it is we're doing rather than spend all this time typing. All right. So here's what I've done. As you can see, we left this line of code alone. We're creating a new sound group called data. We're going to set the data's title property equal to animals. All right, so that's what they're going to see in the pivot item title. And then we're going to create this thing called a base path, and that's really just a path to the folder that will contain all the WAV files. And so we can do something like this, and we just see this repeated over and over again. Data.items.add. So we're adding a new instance of the sound data class, and we're setting its title and file path properties at construction. So the title will be, for example, cat kitten or cat meow or chimpanzee. That's what we'll actually see in the little tile for each sound. And then the file path will be this base path. So in this case, assets, audio, animals, and then the actual WAV file. And we just do that like a dozen or 24 times for all of the various sounds that we want to add. Then finally, after we've added them all, we'll just return our sound group object to the caller. And you can see now our animals property of our sound model class has been populated with a group, and a group contains a bunch of individual sounds, sound data objects. All right? And so what I'm going to do is just go through and repeat this process. In fact, let me roll this helper method up. And we're going to repeat this process for the remainder of these little helper methods. All right, so I pasted a bunch in. Let me just roll all these up. They all follow the exact same pattern, creating a new sound group, setting the title, setting the base path, and then creating individual sound data items and adding them to the items collection. All right, so now we have these 4 helper methods. And then what we want to do is go ahead and, for example, set the cartoons property equal to the helper method that will create the cartoons group. We'll set the taunts property equal to the create taunts group helper method. And we'll set the warnings equal to the create warnings group. And since custom sounds is a little bit different, we're going to save that to much later in this series of lessons, because that's going to contain all of the sounds that we record, and we're going to need to take a different strategy for that. Okay. Now let's go ahead and let's run the app and see what we get by doing this. All right, very cool. So you can see that we see for the animals pivot item all of the animals. But wait a second, how do I navigate over to the other items? Well, we're going to have to fix something. So let's go ahead and stop the app right now. So after staring at this for a few moments, I went ahead and I set the breakpoints, and I think I figured out where the problem actually is. What I'm going to need to do in the view model, where we create the view model, or we get it, I'm going to do the check here, and we'll go view model.load data. There. So by adding an explicit call to load data in the app.xaml.cs, let's see if that fixes the problem. Let's rerun the app. Okay, so we're setting the data context still, but now we're going to start filling up because the first get will actually load the data. So everything should be happy from this point on. And now we got our pivot items and all of the associated sound groups with their collection of items, the sound data items. Very cool. All right, very good. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop that. Okay, so to recap, the big takeaway in this lesson is how we implemented the real data. While there's definitely different approaches that we could have taken, we chose to create helper methods containing hard-coded instance of our sound data and sound group classes in C#. We also saw how to reason our way through an odd timing issue with data binding. Debugging and understanding the order of events is a very valuable skill, as you can see right here. Now, don't forget the challenge that I made at the very outset of this lesson. I hereby challenge you to recreate this app using a different technique for data access, like expanding the sample data.xaml file with real data and then loading it at runtime. Try to figure that out. Can you? I'll bet if you spend a day working on it, you'll have it working without my help. And you might learn more from that challenge and that exercise and the rest of the series, because you can only truly learn whenever you challenge yourself like that. Okay, so we're going to keep moving forward in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you.